Hello, everyone, and welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic, where two really old people that play D&D like to talk about it, and hopefully give you some information that is useful to your gaming day. Because we should be playing this game every single day, as far as I'm concerned. I am Shane,
And I am Andrew.
and I believe we've been off for a week, but we're back, and there has been some update to the Kickstarter. Is that correct?
This is true. Yes, we are halfway through all the books, shipping the books. So some already have started arriving around North America, even on the East Coast. So most of the North American orders should arrive, the single books, this month. And the UK orders, that actually, most of those should arrive within the next 2 weeks or so.
Sweet.
And then the European and other overseas orders and the larger orders, most of those will probably arrive next month, although some will make it through earlier.
And does that mean? Oh no, wait! I'm gonna come pick mine up. I don't need you to mail mine. I'm just gonna come get it because I can, and that's the benefit of living nearby.
That's right. And I actually just talked to Travis. He just got back from Emerald Comic Con in Seattle. And so he's going to
Sweet.
finish up the art for our new Kickstarter, which we hope to launch soon. Looks like maybe the end of this month, maybe beginning of April now. We're just waiting for the art to get finished, and all the black and white and ink sketches, drawings, most of those are done now. Most of it is coloring.
Kick
And
ass.
so, yeah, and then there's a bit of layout to finish, and then we get it approved by Kickstarter. So hopefully it can be up live by the end of the month or early April.
That is so cool. How long does the approval process take? Like what do they
Uh,
actually do? Do they just
pretty
say you're
pretty
not doing
short.
anything illegal?
They just look it over. It takes about a week or so, and then we'd like to gather a few people getting ready for the launch of the Kickstarter. So then you can get an email link that will alert you when the Kickstarter launches, and people can sign up for
That's
that.
cool.
So yeah, hopefully they can sign up for that. Yeah, maybe the third week of this month or so. And
Kick
I'm
ass.
I'm really far along in the manuscript for the whole book for that actually. Um, right now it's 153 pages and 41,000 words for the, for the new book. So
Well, hey, I always encourage people, if you're going to do a bunch of stuff, do it all at once, and then you can just, arrange it and massage it for a while, and then you're done and you're ahead of the game.
true.
Speaking of being ahead of the game, today's topic, we're talking about NPCs, which are characters that basically are played by the DM most of the time. Sometimes the odd player gets to actually control a secondary character, but what is it that we are going to what pearls of wisdom are we going to provide for people today?
Well, we'll just talk about an overview of NPCs, some basic information you might want to have, some useful ways of keeping track of them, some examples of NPCs, how not to use them, um, and where you can find the tables and information to make them in the core books and our books.
Sweet.
So, as Shane said, they're non-player characters. So very clearly, they're the characters that the um, players are not playing. The one time players might play NPCs is like Shane said, like in our group, if we're down to two players, then I might give each of them an NPC companion or sidekick to help balance out the party, um, so they don't get killed that night. um,
That is a very real thing, and I'm very
yeah,
glad that we haven't had that happen so far.
yeah, it is because two adventurers is not usually the minimum you really want to have is four for D&D. Um, it's funny that there's been controversy about it, about the actual name and what an NPC is, because it's very clear. You have player characters played by the players. You have non-player characters which aren't played by the players, who are played by the dungeon master. But there are a few people who say, oh, I'm a dungeon master. I'm going to put a dungeon master player character into the game. No, you don't. That is an NPC because the players aren't playing him. And I've also heard people say a dungeon master NPC. They're all dungeon master NPCs.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't have that. There's no point in players having additional characters like that. Like you said, we've had it because we've been down a few players, and there's been a couple of times where the other players know they're not going to be able to attend a session, but they still want their character to be involved, and have given you, the DM, the approval to say, "Hey, can so and so play my character, or so and so can play the other character," but very rare that that happens, but it does. And I guess technically they're not NPCs, but they kind of are in that situation.
Which are the
other like other if you're playing two player characters, just because somebody can't be there.
Yeah, really, you're playing player characters because you're a player.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I'm kind of like, is that really
all
NPC by definition?
By definition, run by the dungeon master, and all player characters are run by the player. That's how.
Right. Of course. Okay. Now. Okay. Thank you for that clarification, because I still consider them the very rare times that the player can actually control a character,
right?
A character other than their own.
Yeah.
As NPCs, but you're right. They are technically still player characters, and yeah,
for sure. And overall, I mean, really, there's three kinds of NPCs in general in terms of how they interact with the characters. There are characters that oppose, NPCs that oppose the party, the ones that help you, companions and the like, and allies. And then there are ones that are part of the world, and maybe you don't necessarily have a conflict with them, and maybe they don't help you. Maybe they're just a sarcastic blacksmith.
Or that guy on the street corner that gives you directions to the pub.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny too that there's also some people divide them into long-term or major NPCs and short-term or minor NPCs. I think that's a bit funny because that omits the fact that the players are part of the game and the dice are a big part of the game. So you, as the dungeon master, can create a non-player character who you think is going to be very important, but it's up to the players how they interact and what happens with that character. That's a big part of it. And the dice. That NPC could get killed easily because a bad dice roll or a really good roll by the enemy. So I don't think you can go into it right away saying these are long-term and these are short-term, because the game is more unpredictable. And I think if the NPC turns into a long-term one, then you need to add more depth to him or her or it.
Yeah, because we've had characters that show up and for one reason or another tend to stick around, because either it helps you tell the story, or it helps, or actually it's funny because there are characters that have been in various games that I've played in, and they've had, for whatever reason, they stick around, and then something occurs, like something happens to that character that kind of fleshes out the story. Or amuses the players. So, the DM can be like, I'm going to keep that character around because they seem to respond to that character, and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you can. It's really going to depend on how the game goes and what the players do in the game, how they interact. Like, I remember I started one campaign with a noble who was being chased, and the party could have intervened and helped him out, or they could have just let him go and let the authorities deal with it. And there's that NPC gone. But what happened was they did help, and that NPC was then there for 10 or 12 levels and was quite well developed as he went along. So names, of course, even for minor NPCs, in terms of, you think it's going to be minor, like a blacksmith or the person on the street corner or the barmaid, you want to make sure you have names for these characters. And I
Yeah.
always list out about a dozen extra names before I start a game in case the party says, "Oh, to the town guard, what's your name?" Because they usually, in my games, they usually do. Um, I think partly to make sure that that I have a name for them.
That is true sometimes.
So names are important, and I think they mean a lot. Like I spend hours and hours on names of characters, places, and monsters, and to me, it actually has some meaning. Um, then, of course, if the NPC is sort of a humanoid type creature, you're going to have a class, and you want to mix that up a bit. You don't want every NPC the party to meet to be a fighter. Um,
Yeah.
and then races depends what your world is like. One of our Actually, both of our worlds are mostly human, and there are some other races. Um, Appearance. So this obviously has a wide range, and you can really play with this and have some unusual appearances that could catch the party's attention and could could you know could really draw them to your non-player character and make them more
Yeah.
interesting. Um, And one of the first ones I think about is like it's actually a demigod. I think he's a demigod in the world of Greyhawk who has a cowboy hat. Um, but something interesting in terms of their appearance. Maybe they have an eye patch or a tattoo on their face, or maybe they limp. There's lots of ways, and I'll talk in a little while about where you can find tables to give you this kind of information, like different kinds of appearances,
Mhm.
as well as traits and kind of quirks, um, the general personality of these characters, just like the player characters, their flaws, bonds, ideals, and emotions. And again, we'll mention those in the table part. A really key part for any NPC or monster is the motivation. If you know that
Yeah.
for the NPC or the monster, no matter what happens in the game and how things change or what the party decides to do, you can roll with it because you know the perspective of this NPC. If they're involved in a faction, you want to definitely uh, pay attention to that. And then, what information do you have? What information does this player have that they might give the players? You don't want to give everything up easily, um, but it does help the story to give information out with different NPCs. And that can happen in a variety of ways. Somebody could strike up a conversation with someone in a tavern, and then maybe they get a bit of information about the local area. Maybe they're buying a horse at the stables and the stable boy tells them something. So there's ways that you can give out clues and parts of the story that you're weaving. A really great show that gives an example of how to do that is Lost. They
Yeah.
just give you enough information to get you really intrigued, and then they let you go, and then you come back and they give you a little bit more, and then you go a little bit further. It's like leading somebody along.
Yeah.
And if the information is good and interesting and the clues are interesting, and then it can continue. You don't want to do that for too long, but NPCs are a good way to do that. The basics that you could now you don't have to write out a character sheet for every NPC. If you have time, I have a binder, actually 3 binders full of them, but you don't have to do that for every game. The real basics you need are their armor class, and for the average person, average human in your world, it's going to be around 10. Their hit points, any weapon they might have, or spells, magic items, or extra equipment. And you might not even use all their ability scores. If the party meets a wizard, you might only use his intelligence. So depending on how you want to run it, you might not even need all their ability scores, all 6. And
Right.
then depending on your world, it might be useful to know what deity they worship as well. And that might have some, you might have some conflict with other players as well, other characters. Some extras you might want to include are catchphrase. I love those. Um, the family and friends of the NPC could be useful to know, their home or lair, what kind of mount they have, what kind of vehicle they might use, or cart or wagon or carriage, or if they have a ship. Um, Now you can connect these NPCs to general archetypes like the sketchy thief, the annoying bard, the nervous apprentice, the stoic dwarf, the proud elf. And then playing off these types can be fun too, but playing too far off type, you end up becoming Rings of Power in most of the modern TV shows these days, where you've just lost the whole story, right? Like, you're starting to feel sorry for orcs, and you're starting to feel sorry for Sauron because of how he was raised.
That,
Oh man.
that is so true and
Or
so
or
unfortunate.
Willow. There's another show where they've just
Oh,
gone off the rails, right? With story and archetypes.
we don't need
Um,
story. What are you talking about? We don't need to have characters that are fleshed out. I mean, these are just NPCs we pulled
yeah,
off the internet. I mean,
exactly.
come on.
Exactly. Every NPC could be important, as we talked about before. Every NPC could be useful in some ways, and they can develop over time. You don't have to have everything set and organized with your NPC when you start.
Right.
Um, you also don't have to use voices. You don't have to play the role of the dungeon master. You can be yourself when you're DMing, and that means you don't have to do voices. It's totally fine. That's not a prerequisite. Um, you can also have a small selection of voices. Like I seem to always have like the more um, guttural voice, and then I have a high like halfling and gnome voice, and then I have like my old person voice. So I have sort of a menu, and usually I stay within that. And then once in a while, I might do something totally different, like a super deep voice, or
Right.
maybe somebody who talks really slowly or whispers. So all those kind of things can add a lot of flavor to your characters.
Well, that's actually kind of something that I think gets overlooked a lot, where you, as the DM, have full control of these characters, and you don't necessarily. I mean, there have been times where it's like, oh, that character is the same as the last one, or that whatever.
Mhm.
But I find most DMs that they do make an effort. It's like, okay, this character is a halfling, so therefore I'm going to give it a bit of a higher voice. Uh, yeah, or you could switch it up. Say, I'm going to give this the most guttural voice I can manage. Where an orc, like actually specifically in terms of dragons, the very few times we've actually run into like big, huge, dragons that are not trying
Mhm.
to eat us. Um, you tend to give them this slow kind of monotone sort of voice where they're there to say, hi, how's it going, you bore
Mhm.
me, or hey,
Yeah.
I don't care you're here, but here's some information about that you might need to know, because generally that's why dragons show up. They're either trying to eat you, or they're trying to say, hey, here's something you might want to know, because if you go that way, it's gonna break loose. So yeah, there's all kinds of things like that I find, especially you pay attention to the fact of what kind of creature, what mood is it in, um, because when you do the scary voice, when you do like the "I'm going to eat your bones," you know that you're in trouble, even though the character doesn't say something that's
Yeah.
necessarily threatening. You
Yeah.
kind of get an idea that should we trust this person? I don't know. What do you guys think? Maybe we should stab him first. Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and also for like players doing voices, the DM doing a voice. I mean, that is fun because it's you could just say, "I'm gonna give you the what is your favorite color?" sort of questions.
Mhm.
Uh, and
Wrong.
then if the exactly wrong, and then if the character or the player, sorry, responds in a voice or tries to maintain a voice,
Yeah.
um, that I think just it makes it worthwhile to do that kind of stuff. So Anyway, voices, I give them a thumbs up because
Yeah,
they're just
it
kind of
can
fun.
be fun for sure. And then at the same time, you don't have to. You can still play a character and their traits without having that voice. Like you can still have a halfling who's friendly or a very gruff town guard. So yeah, if you don't want to do them, that's fine. Some examples of NPCs that I've used. One was a character, Kira, who was a noble, but they lived in their settlement was in the wilderness, and she was a ranger, and she was much more interested in being in the wilderness than
Yeah.
being at home or in the city or a town. So that's always a fun one. And what happened with her is her roles ended up being terrible, and it just became farcical to the point where after a certain amount of time, I just did all of her attacks at disadvantage because it was so bad. And the party liked her. She was friendly and helpful and um, a really good person, but she was a terrible warrior. And they just kept her around, and she survived somehow. Um, Another one which we've mentioned before is the donkey, where the only thing I knew was that it was a talking donkey. It was annoying, sort of inspired by Shrek, but not entirely, because I just had a tavern named the Talking Donkey or the Laughing Donkey, and I thought, oh, that would be funny if it was named after an actual donkey. And he kept being kicked out of the village. What happened was the party met him and were like, "Hey, would you like to come with us?" And then he's still with them like years later. Um, and he was just really sarcastic and annoying, but there was like a love-hate relationship, and he was very useful to carry around all their stuff. Um, Another one was the traditional femme fatale, Maria, who I had sucker in the party so many times until they were about 10th level. They rescued her at least 2 or 3 times, and she paid them back by joining the other side and spying on them and then trying to kill them. And she is also still alive somehow, even though the party is 20th level, because she also leveled up. um, and I tried the same thing with one of my new groups with the same character, and the same thing happened. It's Charlie Brown going for the football every time, and they've rescued her 2 or 3 times, and now they found out that she's betrayed them.
14 times already.
Yeah. Another one that the players, you know what certain NPCs are working when the party hates them, when the players just can't stand them. So there was one called Red Apple, who's this halfling wizard who was super annoying, didn't had like just wasn't interested in any mercy, killed civilians, basically a terrorist, um, and a super annoying little halfling wizard who kept escaping, and the party just loathed this guy, and he had just no morals, uh, and he was a big favorite, or not a favorite. Um, Another one was a halfling named Tully, who,
Oh, Tully. Yeah, I know Tully.
yeah, in both of the campaigns he's been in, the party basically has fallen in love with this little brave halfling who is actually quite reckless, but and he eventually did get killed in that original campaign. But now I'm running that adventure again, and he's still going. Um, but yeah, he just charges into battle every time with no regard for himself.
Well, and that's important about NPCs, that if they're around long enough and they're well done, they do become like a secondary player that you kind of forget is actually an NPC.
Yeah.
And when they do succumb to some fight somewhere, I think we've had in the last few years, there's probably been about 3 or 4 NPCs that have ended up dying for one reason or another.
Mhm.
And as players, we do actually pause long enough to say, "Oh my goodness, that person is important or was important, and what are we going to
Mhm.
do without them?" And I think that just speaks volumes to how NPCs can worm their way into players' parties, and how they can really form uh, solid bonds that do flesh out the game in a way that I don't think most people would expect. That they just kind of think of NPCs as they're mission givers,
Yeah.
mission reward providers, maybe missing information that you haven't found yet, but they can actually be living, breathing characters, and it just it popped in when you as soon as you said Tully's voice, my brain was like, oh yeah, Tully, I remember Tully.
Yeah.
And I knew that we lost Tully, and there's been a few, there's been several Tullys that we've lost, and they do make an impact, and
Mhm.
you kind of feel sorry later on that after you've escaped the dungeon or jumped off the waterfall or done whatever you had to do to get away or to win that encounter. Uh, I think most of the players do actually stop and go, we need to say something about that character, that NPC that again doesn't get treated like an NPC at all. So
Mhm.
yeah, oh Tully.
Yeah. So, some ways I've noticed that how NPCs are used, there are more people now than when I played back in the 70s and 80s who, in the party, they try to get the NPC to do their dirty work.
Yeah.
Um, it's different that when you have a hireling NPC that you've paid to do this job, but I've noticed in at least one of our groups, especially one of the players, they keep trying to be like, oh, you go ahead first into the dungeon or through that door. Um, so that's definitely not something you want to do all the time because you want to challenge your players and their characters. So the NPCs should not be doing their dirty work all the time. Um,
Well, especially when you run into a group of NPCs, like you've run into a party of six dwarves that are doing their own little mission, and they decide to come along. I have noticed there's a DM I know that has suddenly you have these dwarves that are really kind of rough around the edges, and they're really strong and stuff, end up dying like suddenly there's a hail of arrows, and looks like four dwarves have been killed. It's like they got hit with one arrow. What the heck? And it's like you could tell that there's definitely some bias against. You guys have told this group of dwarves to go over there and
yeah,
do
yeah,
that thing, and
yeah,
no, 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 no. You've had a couple of times. Now we're back to playing with players.
yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's what I do. I like consequences for what the characters do, but also what the players do, for sure.
Exactly.
So yeah, for sure, if players keep using an NPC companion to do that, I'll just kill them.
Well, I do recall there was I think it was a cave in. We were underground somewhere, and I've forgotten who the NPC was. That we had rescued them from a cell or something, and they were giving us a lot of information because they reasonably had been there for a while,
Mhm.
but there was a couple of times where we decided not to go into a room that the players like, oh, I think that's where they do this. Oh, okay. That sounds like it's a terrible place to go. Let's go the other way. And then suddenly it's like, oh no, you run into a random wizard walking down. They fire a whatever at the wall, and
Right.
it misses, and suddenly a
Yeah.
huge boulder kills that character.
Yeah. 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 You can definitely, as the dungeon master, you can decide the fate of the NPCs pretty quickly. There is also a new kind of move that NPCs should never betray the party, which I think is hilarious because
Sorry, wait, where is what? I
that's
beg your
well,
what?
this is also from people who don't want to use the term dungeon master and um so yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that NPCs can do is betray the party. You don't want to do it all the time because that's pretty lame, and the party will expect it, and you're going to have them being suspicious constantly, which isn't useful.
Yeah.
But once in a while, maybe an NPC also can change. Maybe they've decided, I'm getting a better deal from the devils. um, so I think it's very interesting, and I don't do it all the time, but there have been some big betrayals, um, and that's when there's a lot of emotions involved too. the players really can't stand this NPC now, like Maria, for example. A good way to do it is to have the party rescue someone, and they're the victim now, and you've rescued them, and they're helpless, and then then the tables turn, and you find out, no, actually, you didn't rescue a good person. Um,
Well, there's
so
also situations where we've rescued children. I think that we had rescued a couple of families from the local village kind of idea,
mhm,
and some of the they left. They're like, we're leaving. We're gonna get out of here. So those NPCs are gone, which is totally fine since whatever it's understandable that if somebody's rescued and they happen to know the way out, they might just say, I don't care how dangerous it's going to be. I'm going to go. But we've had like characters that are families that have stuck around. That it's usually like a parent and a child, and they're just fodder waiting to be murdered by whatever we run into, and that is something that I think that we've had a couple surprises where, even though we had I think it was a child character, but the child was the one we were there for, and we didn't kind of understand why, and then suddenly the child is like getting attacked by whatever, and turns around and just cuts something down, and it's like, how did this 10-year-old do that? But it's not just the fact that that character is able to do something special, it's that it gives you that story, and you're able to kind of tell the story in a really different way than I think that some people run games. But I don't know, that's just me. I like those little tiny twists where
mhm.
you make assumptions about an NPC and are pleasantly surprised
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that they're able to do something else. Yeah.
So we have in our monster series books, basically there's a lot of these creatures that are really NPCs. Any monster that's really in depth, especially intelligent or more powerful monsters, and you have a lot of detail about what they are and who they are, that's really an NPC. So especially in the city book and a number of these monster books, there are really a lot of NPCs. Um, we also have a lot of NPC books that we have on the DMs Guild and Drive Through. On Drive Through, we have this one called Hirelings and Henchmen, which is a big collection of NPCs. And then at the back, it also has tables for characteristics. So things like, a quick-witted NPC, demanding NPC, optimistic NPC, and then there's also tables for races, classes, backgrounds, and appearances like lanky, sophisticated, poorly dressed, well dressed, athletic. So those are some things could be really useful to make NPCs. And we have a big series on the DMs Guild called Friends and Foes. There's 3 books,
Right.
and we have every class from first to 20th, and collections of NPCs, tons of them. And then in the new Dungeon Master's Guide for 5e, if you go to page 89, there's a whole section on how to build NPCs with tables for appearance, talents, like maybe they're an expert cook. That could be very popular with the party.
Nice.
Um, maybe they're great at one certain kind of game in the tavern. Then they have mannerisms like fidgets all the time, um, slurs their words, speaks in rhyme or some other strange, peculiar manner. Um,
I
there's
love those
ideals,
touches.
there's ideals and bonds like the player characters have, and flaws like overpowering greed, a specific phobia, and foolhardy bravery. And they also mention too in there again about how monsters, if they're more detailed and there's more depth to them, they're really an NPC as well. And then in the old Dungeon Master's Guide for first edition,
Oh, hello.
yeah, in the back of that on page 237 in the original Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a whole section. The thing that's so striking is that this deals with so much more with morality than the new one.
Oh, really?
People don't like looking at alignments and good and evil as much anymore. But back then, that's a huge part of this section. Um, if the NPC is amoral, if they're virtuous, and then all the alignments are listed. They have some tendencies like moody, altruistic, studious, practical joker. That would be a good one. And yeah, so there's lots of different places that you can get information to build them in those two Dungeon Masters guides, in NPC books. And then, as I said in our monster series, a lot of those creatures are actually NPCs as well as being monsters.
And that's the cool thing about the books that you've put together is you're able to utilize any of the NPC like characters, which the thing of the for those who don't have any of Andrew's books, from the fine publishers over at Cawood Publishing at worldofmere.com. The important piece about his books is that they're thematic. There's like an overarching kind of idea of how these characters actually, why they exist, why they're in the world that they're in, and they're not just a listing like one character after the other. They have interactions, they have relationships, they have all these kinds of things. And I just wanted to point that out because that's where a lot of the joy of being able to go into a book and say, hey, this character totally fits the adventure that I'm putting together. So I'll just transplant them in there, maybe modify a few things. But ultimately, it makes it easy. And you don't have to spend so much time because you and I have talked about setting up games before and things of that nature, and we've touched on it over here and there. And one of the nice things is you can go off and spend 25 days kind of going through and creating a world. But then when you actually have to put it together to present it to players to actually, to discover on their own, having books like Monsters of the City totally can make it a breeze. Like you can have all kinds of things in there that you won't find anywhere else because, it's from you and how you like to put games together. So, and it's quicker, I think. Anyway, that's just my opinion. But yeah, go buy all of his books because if you don't, I'll find you and I will tickle you. And I will tickle you. So, but yeah, I mean, these characters, you're right. Like, there are full on NPCs. They're not just these things you transplant and say, okay, this character is going to deliver this info or betray the party this way. But there's a bit more to it that I think is awesome.
Yeah, it also helps, as you say, to have. I mean, the reason we make them is to make it easier for the DM to have those characters and monsters right there, and the NPC books too. Also, all those NPC collections, the Hirelings and Henchmen book and the other books, those can all be used as player characters if the players play them, ready made.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
that's another option too.
The because actually I've done that. You've actually given me characters that came out of the books
Yeah.
and a couple other players in our group, and yeah, I mean it as I said, it makes it easy for oh hey, could you play this character because da 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 is happening and we kind of need that element of the story or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's like great, here we go. Oh, I can play this character, not a problem. Boom, done. So yeah,
And the other thing to remember too is that general thing to know about the dungeon, if you're being the dungeon master, that the players don't know anything that you're doing. They don't know
yeah.
how you've organized the story and the NPCs and the plot. So, you've got to keep that in mind all the time. So if they think they know a character, there might be more to it, and there might be less. There might be less there. They might have overcomplicated things. So you can change. You can add a lot to characters. You can really change them as well, because the characters don't know what's behind the screen, basically, and that's how the game works.
And that's actually something I want to talk about in a future episode because one of the things that I'll just touch on very quickly is the amount of time that a DM has to put games together, and if they are using miniatures, if they're using something to like if they lay it out on the board, and they take time to put it all together because they've got an idea of what's going to happen. It sucks when uh, people can't make it for whatever reason. I remember we had one session where you spent like a whole bunch of time, like half a day the day before to put stuff together, and then like the flu swept through and made everyone got sick,
Mhm.
and then I could just in the back of my mind I just can see you kind of going, looking at the table, looking at the
Yeah,
clock, looking at your children, that kind of thing. Like
yeah.
I was gonna
Like
do
that
this
meme of
tonight.
that guy on the edge of the empty swimming pool just staring into it, or
Exactly.
or Mr. Bean standing in that field.
But
Yeah,
that's totally an episode all on its own about
yeah.
how do you cope with that kind of stuff, and how can players make it better, by bringing snacks, doing all those kinds of things. But
Mostly bringing snacks.
that does go a
That's
long
pretty
way,
much
and
it. Yeah,
and booze. Uh, that's just how I like to do things.
moonshine.
Moonshine. But whoa. But anyway, we've been recording for a while, and I think that it's about time we all go and actually play the game instead of talking about it.
Mhm.
But any final words?
Um, Again, there's there's not a lot of rules about how you can really run an NPC well. It's helpful to have some of those basic, that basic information I told you about, and to have a little sketch of the character. You could fill out a whole character sheet if you want as well. Um, but how, as I said before, how this NPC becomes part of the story, and how important they are, and how long that player NPC stays in the campaign, a lot of that is going to be up to the players and the dice. So I think, it's a good thing to remember to just roll with it. And you could
Yeah.
make this amazing NPC. You think it's really great, but the players just don't really relate to it, or they get killed immediately. Um, so yeah, a good idea is to have quite a few ready. Um, and one of the books I always have with me at the table is that collection of NPCs, because you also might just decide on the spur of the moment to put a character in.
Yeah.
Um, you could have described who's in the tavern, and then um, the party decide they want to go talk to one of the guards, and then maybe that guard turns out to be an NPC with a little more depth to him, and you grab that book and you start looking through and find something that matches. Um, so I think to have lots prepared, just like to have lots of encounters prepared, because you don't know which NPCs are going to be long term or short term. There's a lot of factors.
As sad as that can sound, but it does happen. We've had NPCs last 10 minutes,
Yeah,
at the table, and because they show up during an encounter.
yeah.
But yeah,
Or
they're
there's some that we've had that have lasted as long as the group. I think the group is going to be, it might be 8 years this fall. I think it's 8 years.
yeah.
And we've had some NPCs last that entire time. They're not campaigns that we played constantly. There's one that you're at 20th level, actually a little bit above 20th level. I'm not sure if we would do more with that, but some of those NPCs in that, like Tully and Maria, have lasted almost the entire campaign. 2 years full time, 2 years playing full time, and then they're still not finished. So
Which is kind of epic.
yeah,
Well, thank you everyone for watching, listening, and sending us stuff, because the chocolates have been amazing. Keep sending them. Wink, wink. But we will see you all next week, where I believe we're going to be talking about skills, which is what does that mean? Find out next time on Two Wizards and a Mic. Thank you, Andrew, and I will see you next time.
sounds good. Later.